I don't know if you can hear that, but my sister is currently vacuuming in the background, and so yeah, that's a thing. Ah, oh, look at my hair. It's just all messy right now, isn't it? Uh, oh well. We only have one person watching. Hi, Blade Charge. Good to see you. Uh, and not even you're going to be here all the way. Let's hope people start catching on to this. I'd very much like some more company here. I don't want to just be reading to myself. I like to be reading to you guys. Ella, hello. How's it going? Everyone start spraying this around. Let's get more people in here. Um, especially now that we're done with Genlock. I mean, this is a good kind of post that wind down. Um, that was a very interesting video. Let's see. Let's wait for a few more people to trickle in, shall we? 3 people. Let's see if we can get a little more. Yeah. Let's get one more person, and then I'll really start. I think that's good to do. Yeah. The Voice 6 final review? Hello, Ash. How's it going? So we have 3 people watching. You know what? Yeah. There's more for everyone else instead of myself, so I might as well just start the music and let's get going into this. Now, isn't that relaxing? There we go, 4 people. Like, just what I wanted. Wunderbar. Who's ready to start the next chapters of Resident Evil: City of the Dead? Now, we are actually very much near the end of this book. We're going to definitely be approaching. I mean, the last few chapters look like they're pretty short. So we're on chapter 21 of 32, not including epilogue. And I am looking forward to getting there, but we're not quite there yet. So let me get to chapter 21. That's 22. Let's see. So in the last episode, we had good old Ada Wong getting shot at, and Leon by Anna Birkin, and Leon ducking in front of her to save her, which I think we'll get the full details of here. We saw it from Annette's point of view, and we had the death of Brian Irons and the showdown between Leon and the thing that spat out of Ben's chest. We had a lot of things go down last episode. I'm so looking forward to getting the rest of this out. Here we go. Alright, Blade Charge, come back as soon as you can. We're down to 2 people. Woo! What a crowd, I can see. Well, I hope you guys enjoy. 21. Leon's up to adjust his shoulder harness, so Ada walked ahead, musing on how surprisingly clear the first few tunnels had been. If memory served, the corridor led out right next to the sewage treatment ops. Past that was the tram to the factory, and the machine lift to the underground. Conditions would probably get worse the closer they got to the labs, but with the trek as trouble-free as it had been so far, she was feeling optimistic. Leon had been uncomfortably quiet since they'd opened the path into the sewers, only talking when it was necessary. Watch your step, hold up a minute, which way do you think we should go? She didn't think he was even aware of the defenses he'd put up, but she was getting better at reading him. Officer Kennedy was brave. He was at least above average in the brains department, he was a crack shot, and he didn't know dick about women. When she'd blown off his attempt to comfort her, she confused and hurt him, and now he didn't know how to interact with her. He'd chosen to withdraw rather than risk another rejection. Really, it's for the best. No point in leading him on when it's not necessary, and it saves me the trouble of ego stroking. She stepped into the intersection of the empty hall, thinking about the easiest place to part company for her escort, and saw the woman just before she fired. Bam! Ada felt chips of concrete spray across her bare shoulders as she brought the Beretta up, a blur of emotions and realization flashing through her in an instant it took to react. She wouldn't be able to return fire in time. The woman's next shot would kill her. Anger at herself for being so stupid, and recognition. Birkin. She heard the second shot, and then she was hit, shoved out of the way and falling to the cold floor as Leon cried out in pain and surprise, his warm bulk landing on top of her. Ada took a deep breath, shocked and amazed as she understood what happened, as Leon rolled off her and clutched his arm. She heard running footsteps and Leon's harsh panting and sat up. Oh my god. No shit! He'd taken a bullet. For her. Ada stumbled to her feet, bending over him. Leon! He looked up at her, jaw clenched against the pain. Blood seeped up through the fingers of his hand, pressed to his left armpit. I'm okay, he gasped, and although his face was pale, his eyes clouded with suffering. She thought he was probably right. It undoubtedly hurt like a son of a bitch, but it shouldn't kill him. It would have killed me. Leon saved my life. And on the tail end of that thought, Annette Birkin, still alive. That woman, she blurted, the guilt hitting her even as she turned to run. I have to talk to her. Ada took off, sprinting around the corner and down the hall, the door at the end standing open. Leon would live, he would be fine, and if she could catch up to Annette, this whole goddamn nightmare would be over. She studied the file photos. She knew it was Birkin's wife, and if by chance the woman wasn't carrying a sample, she'd sure as hell know where one was. She ran through the door and stopped short of jumping into yet another water-filled tunnel, pausing just long enough to listen, to scan the surface of the rippling murk. No splashing sounds, and there were still lapping waves to the left, and a ladder bolted to the wall leading up to a fan shaft. Goes to operations. Ada plunged into the water and made for the ladder. There was a hallway farther along, but it was dead-end. Annette would surely have opted for the escape. She quickly scaled the metal rungs, refusing to let herself think about Leon, because he was fine. As she peered through the shaft and saw that it was clear. Mrs. Doctor was probably still running, but Ada wasn't going to walk into another bullet. Through the shaft, a quick peek past the dead, massive blades of the vent fan at the far end, and back down another ladder. The giant two-story chamber housed the sewage treatment machines was empty of life, as cold and industrial and strewn with equipment as she expected. There was a hydraulic bridge that spanned the room, raised to the level she exited on, which meant that Annette must have gone down via the west ladder, the only other way out. Ada flipped through her mental map as she started to cross the bridge, remembering that it went down into one of the many treatment center's dumping grounds. Drop it, you bitch! Behind her, Ada halted, feeling a pain inside, the pain of a hearty slap to the ego. The second time she screwed up, badly in as many minutes, but there was no way she was going to obey in that hysterical command. The woman's aim was for shit, and Ada tensed, preparing to drop and spin to fire. Bam! Ping! The shot hit the floor next to Ada's right foot, glancing off the rusting bridge. Annette had her. Ada dropped the Beretta, raising her hand slowly, turning to face the scientist. Jesus, I deserve to die for this. Annette Birkin walked towards her, a Browning 9mm trembling wildly in one outstretched hand. Ada winced inwardly at the sight of that shaking gun, but saw a possible opportunity as Annette moved closer, finally coming to a stop less than 10 feet in front of her. Too close, and she's right on the edge of a total collapse, isn't she? Who are you? What's your name? Ada swallowed heavily, putting a stutter into her voice. Ada? Ada Wong. Please, don't shoot. Please, I haven't done anything. Annette frowned, backing up a step. Ada Wong. I know that name. Ada, that was John's girlfriend's name. Ada's mouth dropped open. Yes, John Howe. But how did you know? Do you know where he is? The disheveled scientist glared at her. I know because John worked with my husband, William. You've heard of him, of course. William Birkin, the man responsible for the creation of the T-virus. Annette fairly glowed with a mixture of pride and despair as she spoke, giving Ada hope. It was a weakness that she could use. Ada had read the files on William Birkin, read about his steady climb through the Umbrella hierarchy, the advances in virology and genetic sequencing, and about the scientific ambition that had made him a veritable sociopath. It looked as if his wife was operating on a similar plane, which meant that the missus would have no problem pulling the trigger. Play it dumb, and don't give her a reason to doubt it. T-virus? 1 minute, did the stream go down? Alright, that was weird. My display for the stream just fizzled out. Where was I? This live chat, I like that. T-virus? What's... Ada blinked, then widened her eyes. Dr. Birkin? Wait, the Dr. Birkin? The biochemist? She saw a flash of pleasure cross Annette's face, but then it was gone, and there was only despair. Despair and the flickerings of bitter madness deep in her bloodshot eyes. John Howe is dead, she said coldly. He died 3 months ago at the Spencer estate. My condolences, but then you're about to join him, aren't you? You're not going to take the G-virus away from me. You can't have it! Ada started to shake all over. G-virus? Please, I don't know what you're talking about. You know, Annette snarled. Umbrella sent you to steal it. You can't lie to me. William's dead to me now. Umbrella took him from me. They forced him to use it. They forced him... She trailed off, her gaze suddenly far away. Ada tensed, but then Annette was back, her eyes welling up with tears, the weapon pointed at Ada's face. Face. Yes. Shoot Ada's vase. I'm sure she brought that to Raccoon City with her. She trailed off, her gaze suddenly far away. No, sorry, I just read that. A week ago they came, she whispered. They came to take it, and they shot William when he wouldn't give them the samples. They took the case. They took all the finals, both series, except for the one that he had managed to keep, the G-virus. Annette's voice was raised into a shout, suddenly a pathetic, somehow pleading shout. He was dying, don't you see? He didn't have a choice! Ada understood. She understood all of it. He injected himself, didn't he? The scientist nodded, her limp blonde hair falling across her eyes, her voice a whisper again. It revitalized his cellular function. It changed him. I didn't see what he did, but I saw the bodies of the men who tried to kill him afterwards. And I heard the screams. Ada took a step closer, reaching out as if to comfort her, her own features set in a mask of sympathy. But Annette thrust the gun at her again. Even in sorrow, she wasn't going to let Ada get any closer. But it's almost close enough. I'm sorry, Ada said, lowering her arms. So the G-virus, it leaked. It changed all of Raccoon. Annette shook her head. No. When the Umbrella assassins were stopped, the case was broken. The T-virus leaked. The lab workers hit by the airborne were contained. But there were rats, you see. Rats in the sewers. Vase is spelled with an S. Blade charge. She paused, her lip trembling. Unless William, my sweet William, has started to reproduce, implanting embryos, replicating. It shouldn't be time for that yet, but I... She broke off, her eyes narrowing, the madness sweeping over her again as visibly as a crashing wave. High color flared in her pale cheeks, her red-rimmed eyes glossy with paranoia. Get ready. You can't have it, Annette screamed, spittle flying away from her cracked lips. He gave his life to keep it from you. You're a spy and you can't have it! Ada ducked and leapt, pistoning both her arms beneath the nets, shoving the gun up and away from both of them. The Browning discharged, sending a round clanging off the ceiling as they fought for control over the weapon. Annette was physically weaker, but she was driven by demons of hatred and loss, the edge of insanity lending to her strength. But no sense. Ada let go of the gun suddenly, and Annette stumbled, not prepared for the unexpected move. She crashed against the railing of the bridge, and Ada charged, driving her elbow into Annette's lower belly, hitting her beneath the center of balance. And Annette, half turned, her mouth in open darkness of surprise, her arms pinwheeling for balance, and she plummeted over the railing silently, not a sound until a dull thump as her body hit the floor some 20 feet below. Shit! Ada hissed, stepping to the rail and looking down. She lay there, face down and motionless, the gun still clenched in one thin white hand. That's just great. Walk into an ambush, not once, but twice for hell's sake, and then kill the one crazy bitch who can tell you where the samples are. A low moan floated up from Annette Birkin's body, and she moved, hunching her back, trying to roll onto her side. Shit! Ada turned and ran across the bridge, scooping up the Beretta as she hurried for what looked like to be a control panel at the far next to the fan shaft of the ladder. The fan shaft ladder. She'd have to lower the bridge, get to Annette before she could crawl away, except the panel was for the fan, and another painful moan, a slightly louder moan, echoed up through the chamber. Ada knew she didn't have much time. The dump. I can go through the dump, circle back around through one of the tunnels. Even as she thought it, she was jogging for the west ladder, hoping that the pitiful scientist was injured enough to stay down for a minute or two. There was a small balcony at the end of the bridge that looked over the dump, and the metal ladder hung down from the opening on the far right. Ada lowered herself down as quickly as she could, dropping the last several feet onto the cement landing. The dumping area was a large, boxy room, the walls heaped with industrial debris, smashed crates, rusting pipes, wire-encrusted panels, and rotting cardboard. She stepped off the landing into the almost 3 feet black sludge, the cold, gooey muck rising up to her thighs. She didn't care. She only wanted to get to the Lady Birkin and bring an end to her time in Raccoon. Except something moved. Beneath the opaque and stinking liquid, something big moved. Ada saw what might have been a reptilian spine slice through the murk in front of her, saw and heard a stack of boards topple into the water some 10 feet away from the same instance. You gotta be kidding me. Whatever it was big enough to change her mind about the hurry that she was going to get to Annette. Ada backed onto the platform and boosted herself up, never taking her gaze from the indeterminate shape as it curled back through the lapping sludge, and rose up in a sudden violent spray of darkness coming straight at her. Ada raised her Beretta and started to fire. I did eat Taco Bell, so kind of suffering from that. Just letting you know that. There was a tiny elevator platform in one corner of the empty conference room, a square of metal that apparently went down. Claire hurried towards it, fetid water dripping from her clothes, feeling horribly lost and anxious to keep moving to find Sherry. Please be alive, baby, please. She found the drainage hole but no Sherry. After agonizingly long moments of screaming into the rushing water, of trying to squeeze into the tiny hole, she'd forced herself to abandon the effort. Sherry was gone, maybe drowned, maybe not, but unless the flow of water suddenly decided to reverse itself, she wasn't coming back. Claire found the controls for a one-man lift and punched the button. A hidden motor whirred, and the lift descended, inching down through the floor, probably taking her to some other empty hall, some other blank and unknown room, or worse, directly into the path of yet another unnatural creature. She clenched her damp hands in frustration as the lift slid slowly down, wishing that it was faster, that there was some other way to speed up her search. She felt like she was running blind, taking whatever path was in front of her. From the tunnel where Sherry had been lost, she'd found a dimly lit corridor and then an unadorned and somehow sterile conference room. It was like an endless funhouse, sans fun, and she was feeling pretty shitty for bringing Sherry into it. If the girl was dead, it would be her fault. She shut down the futile thinking before it got any farther, making herself focus. Self-recriminalization was a killer, and she couldn't afford it. The elevator was lowering into the hall, and she crouched down, pointing Iron's heavy gun in front of her as the new surroundings rose into view. The concrete corridor had another lift at the other end, and it was intersected by a second hall, maybe 40 feet away, and next to the junction there was a body propped up against one cement wall that looked like a cop. She felt a mix of shock and distress, her eyes widening as she took in the cop's slack features. The hair color, the build. That's Leon? Before the lift hit the floor, Claire jumped off and ran towards the crumpled figure. It was Leon, and he wasn't moving, either unconscious or dead. But no, he was breathing, and she was crouched in front of him, his eyes flickering and open. His hand was high on his left arm, his fingers wet with blood. Claire? His blue eyes seemed clear, tired but aware. Leon, what happened? Are you okay? I got shot. Must have blacked out for a minute. He carefully took his hand away, exposing a small ragged hole just above the armpit, oozing red. It looked painful, but at least it wasn't gushing. Wincing, Leon pulled the shredded fabric of his uniform over the hole and put his hand back over it. Hurts like hell. Well, hurts like all hell, but I think I'll survive. Ada. Where's Ada? The last was delivered almost frantically, Leon struggling to push himself away from the wall. With a soft groan, he fell back, obviously in no shape to move. Lie still, just rest for a minute, Claire said. Who's Ada? I met her at the station, he said. I couldn't find you, and we heard that you can get out of Raccoon through the sewers. The city's not safe. There was some kind of leak at the Umbrella Lab, and Ada wanted to leave right away. Somebody shot at us, and I got hit. Ada went after the shooter down the hall. She said it was a woman. To be honest, Red? Hanset Red. To be Hanset Red. Yes, it is good to be Hanset Red. Resident Evil Leon is my favorite Leon. There's another Leon? We're talking like Leon the Professional here? What other Leon are you referring to? He shook his head as if to clear it, then frowned up at her. I have to find her. I don't know how long I was out, but not more than a couple of minutes. She can't have gone far. He started to sit forward again, and Claire stopped him, pushing him back gently. I'll go. I was with this little girl, and she got lost somewhere in the sewers. Maybe I can find both of them. Leon hesitated, then nodded, resigning himself to his injury. How's your ammo? 7 in this one. She patted the weapon that she had taken from the squad car, tucked in her belt. It suddenly seemed like a million years ago, that wild ride. And 17 in this one. She held up Iron's gun, and Leon nodded again, his head rolling back tiredly. Okay, that's good. Should be able to... that's good. I should be able to follow in a few minutes. Be careful, alright? And good luck. Claire stood up, wishing that they had more time. She wanted to tell him about Chris, about Irons and Mr. X, and the T-Virus. Wanted to find out what he knew about Umbrella, or if he knew a way out of the sewers. But this Ada might be facing down a sniper right now, and Sherry could be anywhere at all. Leon had his eyes closed. Claire turned and started down the intersecting hall, wondering if any of them had a chance of making it out of this madness alive. What song are you thinking of, Ella? "22." Annette hurt all over. She sat up slowly, feeling sick from the seemingly hundreds of aches and pains that yammered for her attention. Her neck and stomach hurt. She jammed her right wrist. Both knees felt like they were swelling. But it was the sharp pain in her right side that was the worst, because she thought she might have cracked or even broken a rib. Karma Chameleon. Annette leaned back as a, You horrible, horrible woman. Annette leaned back, supporting her strained neck with an uninjured hand, but saw only metal and shadow. Ada Wong, the bitch from Umbrella, had apparently run away. She pretended not to know anything, but Annette wasn't stupid. Ada was probably already on her way to the lab, or coming after her, anxious to finish her off. Umbrella. Umbrella did this. It's alright, man. I'm not deleting them, so it's fine. Annette crawled to her feet, using the rage to overcome the pain. She had to get out, had to get to the laboratory before the spies did. But oh, she hurt so very much. The stabbing sensation in her gut was terrible, a knife sawing at her insides, and the lab seemed like a million miles away. Can't let them steal his work. She staggered forward to the door of to the cavernous room, one arm wrapped around her burning chest, and stopped tilting her head to one side, listening. Shots, echoing through the chill air, coming from the adjacent dumping grounds. And for a second later, she heard a thundering hiss. More shots, splashing. Annette grinned, a tight, humorless grin. Perhaps she'd get to the lab first after all. The bridge. Lower the bridge. Don't let her escape. Tired and aching, Annette stumbled to the hydraulics controls and activated the span's descent. The powerful hum of the bridge's motors drowned out the noises of whatever battle was being waged, the platform rotating down and locking into place with a heavy clang. Annette pushed herself away from the wall, falling against the console by the door. She found the switches for the ventilation fan and flicked them up, with a smile, still smiling grimly at the whining stirred up high overhead, grew to a dull roar. Ada had run into trouble in the dump, and Annette wasn't going to let her just climb back out of it. With the bridge lowered, and the shaft blocked, Miss Wong would have to fight her way through. Hope it's a pack of lickers, you bitch. I hope they're tearing you to pieces in there. Annette turned away from the console and fell. The pain and dizziness too much. Her bruised and swelling knees hitting the floor and sending fresh needles of agony through her legs. And the door in front of her opened. Annette raised the gun, but wasn't able to aim, expending what little of her strength just to keep from screaming in suffering and frustration. William, it hurts so bad. I'm sorry, but I can't. A young woman crouched in front of her, a look of worried concern on her smudged face. She was dressed in cutoffs and a vest, dripping with sewer water, and held a sleek, heavy handgun, not pointing it directly at Annette, but not pointing it away either. Another spy. Are you Ada? The girl asked tentatively, reaching out to touch her, and it was more than Annette could stand to be touched in pity by some heartless, scheming corporate pawn. Get away from me! Annette snarled, slapping the girl's outstretched hand weakly. I'm not your contact, and I don't have it on me. You can kill me, but you won't find it. The girl moved and looked a look of confusion on her dirty face. Find what? Who are you? The question again, and the fury passed, leaving her numb. Annette was tired of playing games. It hurt too much, and she just wasn't strong enough to fight anymore. Annette Birkin, she said wearily, as if you didn't know. She'll kill me now. It's over. It's all over. Annette couldn't help it. Tears trickled down her cheeks, tears as futile as her plans. She'd failed William, failed as a wife and as a mother and even as a scientist. At least it would end now. At least there would finally be an end to her anguish. Her anguish. She's Anglo-Saxon. Are you Sherry's mother? The girl's words stunned her, snapping her out of her exhausted collapse as sharply as a slap to the face. What? Who? How do you know about Sherry? She's lost in the sewers, the girl said, speaking quickly, her voice hinged with desperation as she shoved a handgun into her belt. Please, you have to help me find her. I was stuck in one of the drainage... Oh, she was stuck into one of the drainage shafts, and I don't know where to look. But I told her to go to the station, Annette wailed, the physical pain all but forgotten, her heart pounding out waves of horrified disbelief. Why is she here? It's dangerous. She'll be killed. And the G-Virus. Umbrella will find her, and they'll take her. Why is she here? Oh, sup, Kinez? What's up? Welcome to the stream. The girl reached for her again, helping her up, and Annette didn't fight, too weak and terrified to fight. If Sherry was in the sewers, if Umbrella found her... The girl stared at her intently, looking somehow guilty and afraid and hopeful all at once. As a plane passes over my house. moment. The girl stared at her intently, looking somehow guilty and afraid and hopeful all at once. The station was overrun. Where did the drains go? Please, Annette, you have to tell me. The truth dawned on her into exhaustion and fear like a ray of bitter light. The drains led out into the filter pool, which happens to be right next to the factory tram. The fastest route to the labs. It was a trick. The girl was using Sherry's name to get to the facility, to get information about the G-Virus. Sherry was still at the station, safe and well, and this was an elaborate ruse. But Umbrella knows the way. Why would she ask if she knows already? It doesn't make any sense. Annette raised the gun, her aching wrist trembling, and backed away from the girl. Her confusion was too big, the questions too many, and because she couldn't be sure of anything, she couldn't pull the trigger. Don't you move. Don't you follow me, she snarled, ignoring the pain, reaching back to push the door open. I'll shoot if you try to follow me. Annette, I don't understand. I just want to... Shut up! Shut up and leave me alone! Can't you just leave me alone? She backed through the door, pushing it closed on the surprised and frightened girl, squeezing her arm against her bruised and broken rib as the hatch shut. Sherry. It was a lie. It had to be a lie, but it didn't change anything either way. She could still make it. She had to make it back to the facility to finish what she had started. Turning, limping, and gasping, Annette stumbled into the cold darkness of the connected tunnels, letting each terrible, aching step to be a reminder of what Umbrella had done. Annette needs more than a few bandages. A cold, silent cavern, the walls sheen with ice, and I am lost. I am lost and exhausted, running and afraid for a very long time, so I sit down and rest. So quiet, so cold, but my arms hurt. I'm sitting against a wall that has grown spines, and one of them is digging into my flesh, piercing me. It hurts so badly, and I have to get up. I have to find someone. I have to wake up. Leon opened his eyes, aware at once that he had hazed out again. The realization made him catch his breath, the sudden fear jolting him fully awake. Ada, Claire, Jesus, how long? He gently pulled his hand away from his arm, the blood gummy and thick between his fingers. It hurt, but not as sharp as before, and the bleeding had stopped, at least in the entrance. The shreds of his torn uniform had clotted into the wound, forming a stiff seal. He leaned forward, reaching around to touch where the bullet had come out. Again, a hardening, tacky patch of fabric beneath the pulsing ache of the wound. He couldn't be positive, but he thought that the bullet had gone straight through the flesh, missing the bone completely, which meant that he was extremely goddamn lucky. Even if it blew my arm off, Ada's still out there, and I sent Claire after her. I have to get after them. Oh, really? Kenna's. Why do you figure that? Where was I? He thought it was a shock of trauma that had made him black out, rather than pain or blood loss, and he couldn't afford any more time to recover. Clenching his teeth, Leon pushed himself up with his good arm, his muscles cold and stiff from the damp chill of the concrete. His left shoulder brushed against the wall, and he gasped as the pain intensified briefly, stabbing and hot. But it ebbed, receding with a duller throbbing. Oh really, you solved it? Tell me, how did you solve it exactly? Leon waited it out, breathing deeply, reminding himself that it could have been a hell of a lot worse. When he was finally on his feet, he decided that he could take it. He wasn't lightheaded or dizzy. And although there was blood on the floor and wall, there wasn't nearly as much as he thought there would be. Careful not to jostle his wound, Leon turned and walked down the corridor to the closed door at the end, moving quickly as he could. Through the door, he was faced with another water-filled tunnel stretching off in either direction. There was a ladder on the far wall. It was obviously binary, but there was more than that. There was a ladder on the wall to his left, but he didn't even want to guess how to climb it without ripping his wound open. Besides which, there was a loud spinning fan at the top. He struck off to the right, stepping down into the dark water and sloshing forward, hoping that he'd see some sign as to where Ada or Claire had gone. Chasing after the sniper. How could you do that? How could you just leave me there? After their confrontation with the vomiting monster thing, he had sworn to himself that he wouldn't assume anything else about Ada Wong. She was alternately flirtatious and standoffish, and if she'd learned how to shoot by playing paintball, he was a bank. And if she had learned how to shoot by playing paintball, he was a bank executive. Master Poppers. Who's Master Poppers? But in spite of her confusing behavior and probable duplicity, he liked her. She was smart and confident, she was beautiful, and he had assumed there was a good, decent person beneath that contradictory facade. And yet she still left you to chase after the shooter, left you rolling on the floor with a bullet in your arm. Yeah, she's great. You should propose. You're off by, well, you're off for a number of reasons, but I think you're also off by about 6 days. Sort of. You were off by 6 days. It's changed. I'll be addressing it later, but now that I know that someone solved it, or at least gotten close. Say blade charge. He reached a split in the tunnel and blocked out the wandering attempts to figure out Ada's actions, reminding himself that he could ask her when he found her, if he found her. There was a locked gate to the right, so Leon turned left, peering uneasily into the thickening shadow as he trudged onwardly. He shouldn't have let Claire go after Ada alone. He should have pulled himself together and gone with her. He stopped, hearing something. Shots, distant and hollow, coming from somewhere up ahead, distorted by the winding maze of tunnels that led up to the sewer system. Still holding the magnum tightly, Leon pressed his wrist against the bullet wound and started to run, the pain going sharp again, making him queasy. He couldn't manage to find better than much better than a shagging jog, the water slowing him down almost as much as the nasty bite of the wound. But the last echo of the shots faded away as he somehow found the motivation to go faster. There was a dimly lit offshoot to the tunnel ahead and to the left, pale yellow light streaming out across the soft sloping water. Even before he reached it, he saw that he would have to make a choice. Straight in front of him was a platform of sorts, a heavy door set into the ragged bricks of the tunnel's end, water dripping down off the ceiling in slender rivulets. An obvious choice, except... Leon started the elongated patch of murky light looking down into the offshoot. Another door, and he didn't have time to decide. The shots could have come from anywhere. Bam! Bam! To the left, Leon jumped from the tunnel, feeling new pain, feeling hot wetness against his wrist as the wound started to seep. He ignored it, hurrying to the door and pulling it open, hearing more rounds fire as he started down the wide, empty hall. The corridor he entered was shadowy and cold as the sewage tunnels, but much bigger and wider, presumably some kind of transport hall for heavy equipment. It was the 29th, you were right. I'm going to have to delay it though, sadly, by the looks of things at least. We'll see how things pan out. It twisted left and then left again. Boxes and racks of steel canisters against the second corridor, just past some kind of loading door. Acetylene, maybe oxy. Good God, what takes that many bullets that doesn't die? He heard another string of shots, splashing water and a different sound, a deep guttural hissing that chilled him to his core. Strangely familiar, but too loud to be possible. 1,000,000 snakes, 1,000 giant cats, some primordial terrible dinosaur? Oh, actually, that was a thought, not just a read. He ran, finally giving up trying to hold the bullet hole closed, needing his arm free to pump for more speed. The end of the tunnel was closed. He saw a panel and blinking lights and opening to the left, another huge loading door. And he stopped just short of running into the line of fire. As another rapid succession of shots sounded as a thundering crash of water sprayed out. Water raining down on the floor thick "Stop! I'm coming in!" he shouted, and heard Ada's voice and felt a sweeping relief in spite of whatever horror was ahead. Leon! She's alive. Magnum raised, his wound bleeding freely now. He stepped in front of the open door and saw Ada across a lake of churning muck, boxes and broken boards swimming through the turbulent liquid. He was standing on a small ledge of concrete beneath a ladder, her Beretta pointed into the thrashing pool. Ada, what? Splash! A giant burst out of the lake and slammed him off his feet, knocking him back into the corridor. It happened so fast that he didn't actually see it before he was flying through the air, his mind feeding him the picture as he hit the ground. He fell on his injured arm and cried out, as much from shock as from what he had seen, as from the stinging blast of pain. Crocodile. Leon was on his feet, stumbling away before he knew he could get up, and the giant lizard croc that was 30 feet long, Leon was on his feet and stumbling away before he even knew he could get up. And the giant lizard, the croc that was 30 feet long if it was an inch, stepping into the corridor behind him with a mighty bellowing roar. The cement trembled as the mammoth reptile crawled up from the waters of its home, gallons of black water streaming from its toothy, grinning jaws. Jaws as big as me. Bigger. See ya, Kanez. Leon ran. There was no pain. His heart hammering in a primal panic. It would eat him. It would shred him into 100 screaming, bloody chunks. And the beast roared again, an impossibly low bellow that rattled his bones, that urged sweat to burst from every quaking pore. And Leon shot a look back and saw that he was much, much faster than the grinning lizard. He was still climbing through the loading door, its tree trunk short legs and squat, short and squat, its incredible bulk too huge to maneuver so easily. Leon swapped weapons in a daze of terror, his wounds shrieking as he chambered around into the Remington. He slidled backwards in an uneven gait, reaching a turn in the hull, and unloaded all 5 shells as quickly as he could pump them, the heavy rounds blasting the monster crocodile's hideous snout. It roared, swinging its head from side to side, blood erupting from its grinning face in buckets. But it still came, lumbering forward, dragging its armored tail from the pool of slime behind it. Not enough power. Leon turned and ran again, horrified at having to retreat, afraid of what would happen to Ada when he left the crocodile behind, but knowing that it would take another 50 rounds to stop it. That or a nuclear blast, and that's what he was, why he was still thinking he needed to get away and then worry about what to do. Hang on, Ada. The booming steps of the giant filled his ears as he ran past the boxes, past the row of steel cylinders, and stopped running. His instincts cried out for sanity, but he had an idea. And as terrible lizard took another twisting, thundering steps, Leon turned and went back. Let this work. It works in the movies. Please, God, be listening. The row of 5 gleaming canisters was inset on a thick shelf cut into the wall, held into place by a steel cable. There was a release button for the cable on the side of the shelf. Leon slapped it, and the heavy wire dropped, one looped end falling onto the floor. Dropping the shotgun, he grabbed the closest of the cylinders, his muscles straining, blood pouring from his injured arm. He could feel thin, trickling trails of it sliding down his slick chest, but it didn't stop rocking back on its heels to free the canister of compressed gas. There! Leon jumped back as the silver can fell off the shelf, hitting the ground and rolling a few inches. He looked up and saw the croc had covered another 50 feet, close enough for him to see the dull, dirty pits in its 6-inch teeth as it roared again, close enough for him to smell the rotting meat stench of its hot breath only for a second later. Leon raised one boot to the canister and shoved with all he had, the can lazily rolling back towards the gaining lizard. By some incredible stroke of fortune, the corridor floor had some slant to it. The 200-plus pounds of cylinders seemed to pick up speed, spinning in the croc's direction in a loose semicircle. Backing away, he yanked the magnum from his belt and pointed it at the shining can, forcing his fingers not to pull the trigger. The crocodile plodded forward, its tail slapping the wall so hard the stone dust rained down with each violent whip. Leon was in a state of total awe, in the grip of an instinctual terror so deep that it was all he could do not to turn and flee. "Come on, you bastard." Less than 100 feet away, the crocodile and the canister met, and Leon pulled the trigger. The first shot pinged off the floor in front of the rocking can, and the grinning jaws opened. The massive beast lowered its head to catch the obstacle and push it aside. Steady. Leon fired again, and kaboom! Was thrown to the ground as the canister exploded. In a blast of curled steel and ignited gases, the creature's head was obliterated, disappearing like a popped balloon. Almost simultaneously, a wave of steaming gore hit Leon. Bits of tooth and bone, bone and shredded, smoking flesh clapped over him like a thick, wet blanket. Gagging, his ears ringing and arm bleeding, Leon sat up as the headless carcass settled into the floor, its legs crumpled beneath the brainless weight of its reptilian monster. He pressed his blood-covered hand against the wound, exhausted, sick in pain, and as deeply satisfied as he felt in quite some time. "Gotcha, you dumb shit," he said, and smiled. When Ada came jogging up the corridor a moment later, that's how she found him, staring at his handiwork in a daze and dizzy triumph, bloody and bleeding, grinning like a little kid. Or 23 if you go by Irish sounds. Now remember, if you ever want to say something in Irish by counting, you gotta remember it's te, a really strong te sound. So 20, 20, 30, 33. Gotta have that ter sound. Leon was wearing a white undershirt beneath his uniform. Ada tore it into strips and bandaged his arm with it, fashioning a kind of sling for him to wear once she'd slipped his ruined shirt back on. He'd lost enough blood to be dazed, almost helpless, and Ada used his mild shock to explain to herself as she tended to him, feeling mildly shocked herself by the complex emotions that warred inside of her. And I thought she looked familiar. I thought I'd met her through John, and I almost caught up to her, but she must have slipped past me. I got lost in the tunnel trying to find my way back. Nothing of the truth, but Leon didn't seem to notice. Just as he didn't seem to have noticed the gentle, careful way she touched him, or the very slight tremor in her voice as she apologized for the third time for leaving him behind. He saved my life. Again. And all I have to give him in return are lies, calculated deceit in exchange for his selflessness. Something had changed for her when he had taken the bullet for her in her stead, and she didn't know how to change it back. Even worse, she didn't know what she wanted to change it, if she wanted to change it back. It was like a birth of a new feeling, some emotion that she couldn't name, but seemed to fill her up. It was unsettling, uncomfortable, and yet somehow not altogether unpleasant. His clever solution to the problem of the nearby, nearly invincible crocodile, the creature that she'd only just been able to hold at bay, in spite of her best efforts, had made her, the unnamed feeling even stronger. The hole in his arm was only a flesh wound, but from the streaks of blood fresh across his smooth chest and stomach, she knew that it had been hurting bad, draining him, killing him, as he'd worked to save her ass. Get rid of him now, her mind hissed. Leave him. Don't let this affect his job. The job, Ada, the mission, your life. She knew it was what she had to do, that it was the only thing to do. But when he was fixed up as best as she could manage, and her pathetic cover story had been told, she constantly forgot to listen to herself. Ada helped him to his feet and led him away from the gut-splattered scene of the monster reptile's demise, spiting off some nonsense about having found what looked like to be an exit when she'd been lost. Annette Birkin was gone. As soon as Leon had led the crocodile out of the dump, she had scaled the ladder and checked, and seen that Annette had retained enough sense to start the fans and lower the bridge before running, effectively blowing Ada's other options for escape. The woman was possibly psychotic, but not a moron. And although she'd been wrong about Ada's source of purpose, She'd been dead as the purpose. She'd been dead on as to the purpose itself. To wrap the mission, Ada would have to get to the lab as quickly as she could before Annette could do anything. Final. And Leon, silent and stumbling Leon, would add to her time by half. Good on you, Kennas. Glad to have more people around. I'm thirsty, Leon whispered, his breath warm across her neck. She looked up into his gore-stained, blinking face and found that the voice inside was easier to ignore this time. She'd have to leave him, of course. In the end, there would have to be a parting of ways. But not yet. Then we'll have to find you some water. We'll have to find you some water, she said, and steered him gently in the direction she needed. Sherry woke up in the... Oh, let me take a sip, because I'm thirsty. I need water. Sherry woke up in the dark, a terrible bitter taste in her mouth. A river of cold gunk tugged at her clothes. There was a rumbling sound all around her. The sounds of the sky was falling, and for a second, she couldn't remember what had happened, or where she was. And then she realized that she couldn't move. She panicked. The thundering sound was fading and then gone, but she was struck with some awful, stinking river pressed against cold, wet hardness, and she was alone. She opened her mouth to scream, and then remembered the screaming monster. The monster and then the giant bald man and Claire. Remembering Claire stopped her from screaming. Somehow the image of her was like a soothing touch, easing through the blind terror and allowing her to think. Got sucked into the drain hole, and now I'm somewhere else, and screaming won't help. It was a brave thought, a strong thought, and it made her feel better to think it. She pushed herself away from the hardness at her back, treading the dark water and discovering that she wasn't stuck at all. She had been up against a row of bars or openings in the rock, and the force of the current had held her there. Probably saved her from drowning. The disgusting goop was flowing around her, tinkling and burbling like a regular old stream, not nearly as strong as before, and the bad taste in her mouth meant that she must have swallowed some of it. Thinking that opened up the rest of her memory. She'd been floating along and they had gotten twisted somehow, and had gulped some of the horrible chemical-tasting liquid and freaked out. Passed out, she thought. Oh, no. We still have one more chunk, I guarantee you. I'm probably going to get up to chapter 26 by my best measure. At least the noises had stopped, whatever that had been. A noise that had been a moving train or maybe a giant truck roaring away. And now she was even more awake, and she realized that she could see. Not very much, but enough to know that she was in a big room filled with water, and there was a tiny feeble shaft of light coming down from high above. There has to be a way out. Somebody built this place. They have to have a way out. Yeah, Sherry, good luck with that. I looked at the floor map of the fucking original game, and it's just insane. It's absolutely ludicrous. Sherry swam a little farther into the big room, and kicking, she felt her toes glance off against something hard and flat. Feeling stupid for not thinking of it already, she took a deep breath, lowered her legs, and stood up. The water was all the way up to her shoulders, but she could stand. The last traces of panic slipped away as she stood in the middle of the room, turning slowly, her eyes getting used to getting the most from the weak light, and she saw the ladder shape against the far wall. She was still scared, no question, but the sight of the shadowy rungs meant that she'd found a way out. Sherry lifted her feet and padded towards the ladder, proud of how she was handling herself. No screaming, no crying, just like Claire said. Strong. She reached the ladder and pulled her knees up to the bottom rung, a few inches above the surface. She got her feet beneath her and started climbing, grimacing at the thick, slimy feel of the metal bars beneath her pruned fingers. The ladder seemed to go on forever, and when she risked looking down to see how high she'd gone, she could only see a tiny shimmering patch of the water's lapping top where the light hit it directly. She could see the source of the light too, a narrow slit in the ceiling, not much higher than where she was. Almost to the top. Almost to the top. And if I fall, I won't get hurt. There's nothing to be scared of. Sherry swallowed heavily, willing the thought to be true, and looked up again. A few more rungs, and when she reached up for the next, her hand touched the bumpy metal ceiling. She felt a burst of accomplishment, pushing it with one hand, and it didn't move. Not at all. I love this book. It's a fun read. It's nothing super deep, but it's a lot of fun. It's great characters too. It really knows how to expand the mythos of Resident Evil in a lot of different ways, and the characters especially. Shit, she whispered, but it didn't sound annoyed the way she'd hoped. The word sounded small and lonely, almost like a plea. Sherry hooked an elbow through the rung as she was holding, touched her pendant for luck, and then tried again, really pushing this time. Straining with all of her might, she thought she felt it give just a little, but not anywhere near enough. She lowered her hand, cursing silently this time. She was trapped. For several minutes she didn't move, not wanting to back down into the water, not wanting to believe that she was stuck, but her arms were getting tired, and she didn't want to jump either. Finally, she started down, much more slowly than she'd come up. Each step lower was like admitting defeat. She was perhaps a third of the way back to the water when she heard the footsteps overhead, a light thumping at first, more vibration than anything, but then quickly redefined into separate steps, getting louder, then closer, and getting louder still, approaching the top of the pit where she'd awakened. Sherry gave about a second's thought to ignoring the footsteps and then scrambling up the ladder, deciding that it was worth the risk. It might not be Claire or even anyone who meant her well, but it could be her only chance to escape. She started shouting before she got back to the top. Hello? Help! Can you hear me? Hello? Hello? The footsteps seemed to pause, and as she reached the ceiling again, still calling out, hit on the metal several times with her fist. Hello? 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 Another smack with her decidedly sore hand, and suddenly she was hitting air, and a blinding light was in her face. Sherry? Oh my God, sweetie, I'm so glad you're okay. Claire. It was Claire. And Sherry couldn't see her, but she was nearly overwhelmed with delight at the sound of her voice. Strong, warm hands helped her up. Warm, damp arms were hugging her tightly. Sherry blinked and squinted and started to be able to make out the features of a vast room through the brilliant white haze. How did you know it was me? Claire asked, still holding her. Didn't, but I couldn't get out myself, and I heard walking. Sherry looked around at the big room that Claire pulled her into, feeling stunned and amazed that Claire had heard her at all. The room was huge, spanned by a series of metal catwalks laid out in a diagonal. In the section of the floor that she'd come up out of was the farthest corner of the darkest part of the room, the panel that Claire had lifted only a couple of feet across. Man, if I hadn't knocked, would she been going a little faster? I'm very glad it's you, Sherry said firmly, and Claire grinned, looking just as happy and amazed as Sherry felt. Claire knelt in front of her, smile fading as a little. Sherry, I saw your mom. She's okay. She's alive. Where? Where is she? Sherry blurted, excited by the news, but feeling a kind of nervous uncertainty tensing her muscles suddenly, making it hard to breathe. She looked into Claire's worried gray eyes and saw that she was thinking about lying again, that she was trying to figure out the best way to tell her something unpleasant. Even a few hours ago, Sherry might have let her do it too. But not anymore. Not anymore. Strong and brave we have to be. Oh, that's a hard question. RE4 is up there. Revelations 1 is really damn good, but I think I had to stick with Resident Evil 2 overall. Both the original and the remake. They both have their pros and cons, but they even out quite well. Tell me, Claire. Tell me the truth. Claire sighed, shaking her head. I don't know where she went. She was scared of me, Sherry. I think she thought I was someone else, someone bad or crazy. She ran away from me, but I'm pretty sure she came this way, and I was trying to find her again when I heard you calling. Sherry nodded slowly, struggling to accept the idea that her mother had been acting weird enough for Claire to try and sugarcoat it. And you think she came here? Sherry asked finally. I can't be positive. I also ran into this cop, Leon, before I saw your mother. I met him when I first got into the city, and he was in one of the tunnels I went through after you disappeared. He was hurt. He couldn't come with me to look for you, so after your mom took off, I went back to get him, but he was gone. Dead? Claire shook her head. Nope, just gone. So I backtracked it, and as far as I can tell, this is the only way your mom could have gone. But like I said, I'm not sure. Revelations is really good, the first one at least. A little too gamey for my taste, personally, but it definitely had that Resident Evil feel and charm to it, unlike, say, Resident Evil 6, and even Resident Evil 5 to some degree. She hesitated, frowning, gazing at Sherry thoughtfully. Did your mom ever tell you about something called the G-Virus? G-Virus? I don't think so. Did she ever give you anything to hold on to, like a little glass container or something like that? Sherry frowned back at her. No, nothing. Why? Claire stood up, putting her hand on Sherry's shoulder and shrugging at the same time. It's not really important. Sherry narrowed her eyes and Claire smiled again. Really? Come on, let's see if we can figure out where your mom went. I bet she's looking for you. Sherry let Claire lead the way, wondering why she was suddenly sure, almost certain in fact, that Claire didn't believe what she was saying. And wondering why she couldn't find her in herself to ask any more questions about it. The factory machine lift, like the tram, was exactly where Annette had left it. The margin had surely tightened, but she was still ahead of the spies, of Ada Wong and her ragged little friend. Everyone just poor Claire, everyone just assumed she's a fucking spy. 6 had moments. That's the best I can say about it. And ragged little friend. Lies. Telling me lies like they all tell me lies. As if losing William, suffering such pain and loss isn't enough to shame them. She fumbled the control key out of her torn lab coat. Oop. Okay, as we died, I should mention that later. She fumbled the control key out of her torn lab coat pocket, leaning heavily against the mounted controls as she inserted the key and turned it. Her shaking fingers touched the activation switch with a trail of lights appeared on the console, too bright even in the moon-filled darkness. Cool autumn air brushed over her aching body, a friendly secret wind that smelled like fire and disease. Like Halloween, like bonfires in the dark when they brought out their dead, burning the pestilent flesh of the plague-ridden bodies. 4 squealing, blaring honks sounded onto the night sky, the massive elevator room telling her that it was time to go. Annette staggered up to the gray and yellow steps, unable to remember what she'd been thinking about before. It was time to go, and she was so tired. How long had it been since she'd slept? She couldn't remember that either. Hit my head, yes? Or just sleepy, mayhaps? She'd been exhausted before, but the relentless pain of her injuries had sent her into some kind of delirious space that she never imagined could exist. Her thoughts came spiraling, uneasy bursts of feeling that she couldn't seem to sort through, at least not to her satisfaction. She knew what had been done. The triggering system, the subway gate opening, the hiding in the shadows, the waiting to heal. But the rest had become some strange, disjointed grouping of free association, as if she'd taken some drug that had overloaded her senses, and would only let her think a bit at a time. Oh, hey Thomas, I didn't even realize you were here. Holy shit. It's almost over. Clutching the thought like a lost love, she found that she had the latch to the metal room and went inside. The controls pushed. The movement and sound of movement engulfing her as she lay across one soft metal bench and closed her eyes. A few moments of rest and it was almost over. Annette sank into the dark, the thrumming motors lulling her into a deep, instant sleep. She was going down, her muscles relaxing, her aches and miseries loosening their hold. And for some endless reach of time, she found a silence, until a howling, terrible scream knifed into her darkness, a shriek of such fury and pain that it spoke for her heart, and she jerked back to life, panting and afraid, and then realized what had snapped her out of her dreamless sleep. And her thoughts came together, giving her one more clear and constant thing to hold on to. It was William. William had come home. He had followed her, and Umbrella would have nothing because the thing that had been her husband had come back into the blast radius. The scream sounded again, this time echoing away into one of the lab's many secret places as the lift went down and down. Annette closed her eyes again, and she, the new thought joining her lost love from before, the two of them together making her happy at last. William has come home. It's almost over. The third followed naturally, added as she slipped back into silence, knowing that she had to get up too soon to begin the final journey. When the lift stopped, she'd wake up and be ready. Umbrella will suffer for what they've done, and everybody dies at the very end. She smiled, and she fell asleep, dreaming of William. Right, I'm going to get a drink, close my blinds because it's getting dark outside, and I'll be right back. So, give me a moment. One moment. what's this one? Oh, I didn't know I had that. Intermission. Huh. Can't remember what I have. Oh, yes, all of the memes. T series made the T virus. Subterfuges. Okay. Now that we're all good, we currently have 6 people watching. Good to know that. We should have 3 more chapters before I call it quits for the night. It's going to be 286. So literally 31 pages. I have 31 pages to clear. It's about this much. I think I could swing that. Let's have some fun. Chapter 24. Leon finally started to feel like himself again, sitting in the control room where Ada had left him. She found a med kit in one of the dust-covered cabinets along the with a bottle of water. She'd only been gone for about 10 minutes, but the aspirin was starting to kick in, and the water had worked wonders. He sat in front of the switch-covered console, trying to piece together what had happened after the explosion in the sewers. The last thing he really remembered was clearly seeing the headless crocodile collapse, and then being covered by a lightheaded weakness. Ada had bandaged him up and then led him through the tunnels, and a subway, where we were on a subway for a minute or two. And finally to this room, where she had told him to rest while she went to check on something. Leon had protested, reminding her that it wasn't safe, but had still been too fuzzy to do much more than sit where she'd put him. He never felt so helpless or totally dependent on another person. Once he gulped about half a gallon of a jug of water, though, he started to snap out of it. Apparently blood loss tended to dehydrate. She gave me water and then went to check on what exactly? And how did she know to come this way? He barely had been able to walk, let alone ask questions. But even in his delirium, he noticed how certain she was, how she'd chosen their path with unwavering precision. How could she know? She was an art buyer from New York. How could she know anything about the sewer system of Raccoon City? And where is she? Why hasn't she come back? She helped him. She had most probably saved his life, but he couldn't just keep believing that she was who she said she was. He wanted to know what she was doing, and he wanted to know now, not just because she'd been keeping secrets. Claire was still somewhere in the sewers, and if Ada knew the way out of the city, Leon owed it to her to try and find a way out. Leon stood up slowly, holding onto the back of the chair, and took a deep breath. Still weak, but no dizziness, and his arm didn't hurt that badly either. The aspirin, perhaps. He drew his magnum and walked to the door of the small, dusty room, promising himself that he wasn't going to accept any more vague answers and smiling brush-offs. He opened the door and stepped out into the open-ended warehouse, almost big enough to be an aircraft hangar. It was empty, decrepit, and heavily shadowed, but the brisk night air that breezed through made it almost pleasant. And there was Ada, stepping into a raised platform just outside of the hangar, disappearing behind what looked like a section of train. It was an industrial transport lift, and from that well-oiled looks of the rails that ran through the warehouse, it was one part of the abandoned factory that hadn't been completely abandoned. Ada! Keeping his wounded arm tightly pressed to his body, Leon ran towards the lift, and felt dull anger as he heard the rising thrum of the transport's engines, the heavy mechanical sounds spilling out into the clear night sky. Ada was leaving. She hadn't gone to check on anything. But she's not going anywhere until she tells me why. Leon ran out onto the moonlit open, hearing the door to the transport slam shut as he skirted a control console and stepped into the vibrating metal platform, nearly tripping on the brightly painted step. Before he could catch his balance, the transport started to descend. 3-foot-high panels corrugated metal rose all the way around the train, containing the large platform as it slid smoothly down into the ground. Leon grabbed for the door handle as the darkness swept around him, around the humming transport. The sky dwindled into a smaller and smaller starry patch overhead. The cool pale light of the moon and stars was quickly replaced by the electric orange of the transport's mercury lamps. He stumbled inside and saw the startled look on Ada's face as she stood up from the bench and bolted to one side, as she half raised her Beretta and then lowered it again. A flash of guilt there and gone in the time it took him to close the door. For a moment, neither of them spoke, staring at each other in the room, as the room continued in smooth descent. Leon could almost see her working to come up with an explanation, and as tired as he was, he decided that he just wasn't in the mood. "Where are we going?" he asked, making no effort to keep the anger out of his voice. Ada sighed and sat down again, her shoulders sagging. "I think it's the way out," she said quietly. She looked up at him, her dark gaze searching his. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have tried to leave without you, but I was afraid." He could hear real sorrow in her voice, see it in her eyes, and felt his anger give a little. "Afraid of what?" "That you wouldn't make it. That I wouldn't make it, trying to keep both of us safe." "Ada, what are you talking about?" Leon moved down to the bench, sitting down beside her. He looked down at her hand, speaking softly. When I was looking for you back in the sewers, I found a map," she said. "It showed what looked like some kind of underground factory, or a laboratory or factory. And if the map was right, there was a tunnel that runs from there to somewhere outside the city." She met his gaze again, honestly distressed. "Leon, I didn't think you were in any condition to make a trip like that. Like this. I was scared that if I brought you with me, if it was a dead end or something attacked us." Leon nodded slowly. She'd been trying to protect herself. And him. I'm sorry, she repeated. "I should have told you. I shouldn't have just left you like that. After all you've done for me, I at least owed you the truth." The guilt and shame in her eyes wasn't something that could be faked. Leon reached for her hand, ready to tell her that he understood and that he didn't blame her, when there was a resounding thump outside. The entire transport shook, which was a slight tremble, but enough to make both of them tense. Probably a rough spot in the tracks," Leon said, and Ada nodded, gazing at him with an intensity that made him pleasantly uncomfortable, a warmth spreading through his entire body. BAM! And Ada flew off the bench, thrown to the floor as a massive curled thing slammed through the wall, crashing through the sheets of metal of the vehicle's side as though it were made of paper. It was a fist with a bone claw, each of them nearly a foot long, and the claws dripping with Ada! Giggity. No, she's been stabbed. The giant hand withdrew, its bloody talons ripping a new hole in the metal wall as Leon dropped to the floor, grabbing Ada's limp form, pulling her into the center of the transport. A terrible shriek pealed through the moving darkness outside. It was the same furious cry they had heard in the station, but louder, more violent, and even less human than before. Leon held onto Ada with one good arm, feeling the warm trickle of blood sleeping out from her side, feeling her dead weight against his heaving chest. "Ada! Wake up, Ada!" Nothing. He lowered her gently to the floor and then pulled at the bloody holes in her dress, just above her hip. Blood was welling up from two deep punctures there. There was no way to tell how bad, and he ripped at his fabric, tearing at the bottom few inches of her short dress and pressing the wadded material against the wound. And again the monster screamed, and the rage in its throaty howl was nothing to what Leon was feeling, staring down at Ada's still enclosed face. He stretched her tight dress over the makeshift bandage, fixing it in place as best he could, then stood up and unstrapped the Remington. Ada had taken care of him, had protected him when he couldn't protect himself. Leon loaded the shotgun grimly, feeling no pain at all as he prepared to return the favor. When they reached what looked like the end of the line, it was Sherry who figured out where her mother must have gone. They walked into yet another open, shadowy room, but it only had one door there. There seemed to be no other way out of the cavernous chamber, unless Annette had jumped off the raised floor and trekked off through the unlit emptiness into the unlit emptiness surrounding them. They stood at the edge of the darkness, trying to see down into the shadows and having no luck. The room was set up almost like a loading dock. a railed platform ran from the edge to the back wall, and ended abruptly, giving way to a seemingly endless void. Either Arnett had climbed down and navigated some secret path to the dark of the chamber, or Claire had been mistaken about which way she had gone. So what now? Go back and try to follow. She didn't want to do either, although going back pretty much beat the crap out of the idea of walking into a pitch-black abyss. And Leon was probably still back there somewhere. Could it be a train? This is like a train station, Sherry asked, and as soon as she said train, Claire gave herself a solid mental kick in the ass. Platform, railings, about 1,000 overhead pipes? Claire grinned at Sherry, shaking her head at her own stupidity. She was getting flaky, no doubt about it. Yeah, I think it is, she said. Though you guessed it, not me. My brain must be on strike. The small computer console on one side of the platform, the one she dismissed as unimportant, was probably the control board. Claire headed for it, Sherry following along, clutching absently at the gold locket as she described the noises she'd heard down in the drainage well. And it was moving away like a train would. It scared me pretty bad, too. It was loud. Sure enough, just beneath the small monitor screen on the standing console was a recall command code and a 10 key. Claire tapped on the code and hit enter, and the chamber was filled with a smooth hum of working machinery, the sound of a train. You're one smart cookie, you know that? Claire said, and Sherry practically beamed, her entire face crinkling with its sweet smile. Claire wrapped an arm around her shoulder, and then they walked back to the edge of the platform to wait. The tram's light appeared a few seconds later, the tiny circle of brightness getting bigger as they watched. After the trials they'd been through, Claire decided to be as fantastically optimistic about this new development as she could, primarily to keep her from worrying about what horrible things would probably happen next. The train would lead out of the city, of course, and it would be well stocked with food and water. It'd have showers and fresh warm clothes. Nah, scratch that. A hot tub, and a couple of those thick terry robes for after, and slippers. Nice, but she settled for anything that didn't include monsters or crazy people. She glanced at Sherry and noticed that she was still rubbing her locket. So what's in there? She asked, wanting to make Sherry smile again. Got a picture of your boyfriend, or what? Inside? No, it's not a locket, Sherry said. Claire was pleased to see a faint blush rise to her cheeks. My mom gave it to me. It's a good luck charm, and I don't have a boyfriend. Boys my age are totally immature. Claire grinned. Get used to it, sweetie. As far as I can tell, some of them never grow out of it. The train was close enough for now to see its shape. A single car about 20 or 25 feet long, riding smoothly along the overhead track. Where do you think it goes? Sherry asked, and before Claire could answer, the door to the platform exploded. The hatch blew inward, torn off its hinges in a squeal of metal and clanging to the floor, and Claire grabbed Sherry, pulling her close as the towering Mr. X stepped into the room, bending low and sideways to squeeze through the opening, his soulless gaze turning towards them at once. Get behind me! Claire shouted, pulling Iron's handgun, risking a glance back at the approaching train. 10 seconds, and they needed 10 seconds. But X took a giant step towards them, and she knew that they didn't have that. His bland, terrible face expressionless, his hands already rising, still 20 feet away, but only 4 steps in his massive stride. Get on the train when it stops, Claire screamed, and pulled the trigger. 4, 5, 6 shots beating into his chest. The 7th hit one dead white cheek, but Mr. X didn't blink, didn't bleed, didn't stop. Another mighty step, the black smoking pit in his face, testament to his inhumanity. Claire lowered her aim, legs, knees. Bam! 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 And he paused as the round smashed into him, at least one direct hit to his left knee. The black eyes fixated on her, marking her. Here! Come on! Sherry was pulling at her vest, screaming, and Claire backed away, squeezing the trigger again. 2 more rounds hit him in the gut. And then she was on the train, and Sherry had found the controls for the door. It whooshed shut. Mr. X, framed in the tiny window, not coming forward anymore, but still not falling. Not dying. Follow me! Claire shouted, spotting the board of blinking lights to her right. knowing that the door wouldn't hold for a second if the giant, terrible creature started walking again. Claire ran for the control board with Sherry at her side, thanking God that the designer had been user-friendly as the red "Go" button snapped down beneath her shaking hand, and the train was moving, sliding away from the platform, away from the indestructible unmanned, and into the black. Annette sat in the staff bunk room on level 4, waiting for the mainframe to respond to the power-up and debilitating whether or not to initiate the P-Epsilon sequence. Once the failsafe was triggered, all the connecting corridors would unlock, and those doors that were electronically powered would open. The creatures that had been trapped these last days would be free to roam, and most of them would be hungry. Hungry and hot, bleeding pure virus from their clotted flesh. She didn't want to run into any unpleasantness upon her departure, but the first lines of code spilled across the screen, and she decided against running the sequence. The P-Epsilon gas was an experiment anyway, something a couple of microbiologist tests had worked up to appease the Umbrella damage control staff. If it worked, it would knock out the RE3s and all of the human carriers that had been infected by the initial airborne. The first wave ensuring that a safer trip to the escape transport tunnel. But the spies were coming, and Annette didn't want to make things easier for them. She heard the lift being recalled as she stumbled her way through the synthesis lab, which was fine, great. They'd be just in time for the finale, and she wanted them fighting for their lives as she sped away from the facility, away from the brilliant explosion that would consume the multi-billion-dollar facility. And burn it all. Burn it, it'll all burn, and I'll be free of this nightmare. Endgame, and I win. Umbrella loses once and for all. The sneaking, murdering animal bastards. She felt good, awake, and aware, and in very little pain. She meant to go straight to the nearest computer outlet upon her return to activate the failsafe, even before collecting the sample. But she'd barely been able to see straight as she stumbled off the lift. She'd been afraid of forgetting something, or worse, falling and being unable to get up again. A trip to the meds locker in the synthesis lab had fixed all that already. The terrible pain was a distant memory, along with the bizarre, diluted thought process that had made it so hard to concentrate. When her little cocktail shot wore off, she paid for the temporary reprieve, but for the next couple of hours at least, she was good. She was better than new. Epinephrine, endorphin, amphetamine, oh my. Annette knew she was high, that she shouldn't be overestimating her abilities, but why shouldn't she feel happy? She grinned at the small computer in front of her and started to tap on the codes, her fingers flying over the keys, feeling like her teeth would crack as the synthetic adrenaline pounding through her dilated her veins. She made it back to the lab. William had come back. The sample, the very last G-virus sample in the facility, was tucked into her pocket. She'd hidden it in one of the fuse cases before she'd gone looking for William, and picked it up on the way to the staff room. 76E, 43L, 17A, failsafe time. 20, vocal warning, warning power cut. 10, personal authorization 0001 Birkin. And that was it. Annette couldn't stop grinning. Didn't want to stop as she lightly stroked the enter key. The triumph, a hot liquid joy spinning through her numb, tattered flesh. One touch, and there was nothing on Earth that could stop it. In 10 minutes, the taped warning would start to run, and the transport lift would shut down, cutting the facility off from the surface. In 15, the audio would begin the countdown. 5 minutes to reach the minimum safe distance by train. Another 5, and boom! 20 minutes before the explosion. More than enough time to get to the tunnel and power up the main train. No matter what is loosed, enough time to speed away from this ticking clock beneath the city streets, through the isolated foothills at the outskirts of Raccoon. Enough time to get to the end of the track, walking out of the private plot of land, turn around and see Umbrella lose it all. As the clock ticked 0, the plastic failsafe charges in our laboratory central power core would be activated. Even if all but one of the 12 explosive packets failed, that one blast would be enough to set off the secondary charges that were built into the walls themselves. Umbrella's failsafe system had been designed to take it all down. The lab would become an inferno, blasting up in the dead city, into the dead city, visible for miles. Blasting, and she'd be there to see it, to know that she'd done what she could to make things right. This is for you, William. The thought was bittersweet. For some time, they hadn't enjoyed the relationship as husband and wife. William was so brilliant, so devoted to his work, that the pleasures of synthesis and development had taken the place of the perks of married life. She had come to recognize his genius, to learn the joys of supporting him without the nuisance of relationship struggles. But now her fingers resting on the end to it all, she found herself suddenly wishing very much that there had been more between them in the last few years, more than her adoration for his incredible gifts and his appreciation for her assistance. This is our last kiss, my love. This last contribution to the work, my final loving act to what we shared. Yes, that was right. That was the feeling. Annette pressed the key, her heart singing as she saw the locked code flash across the monitor in glowing green. I respectfully tender my resignation, she said softly, and started to laugh. I believe we're getting close to the goal. 286, so 20. 18 pages. We have 18 pages left to go. Holy shit. And 18 pages for today, not in the whole book. We still have more pages. 25. The dark slid past the moving platform. Metal darkness bathed in murky orange light, and whatever had punched through the wall of the transport was gone. Leon had edged his way around the enclosed room twice, and had seen nothing at all, heard nothing but the smooth hum of the working motors. When the creature finally howled from the shadows atop the roof, and Leon snapped the shotgun up, what he saw actually made him freeze. In the second it took him to really see it, his vengeful fury blew away like so much dust, replaced by absolute bone-chilling awe. Holy shit! The thing was still shrieking, its head thrown back, the brutal gurgling scream like a voice of hell in the moving dark. It had been a man once, arms and legs, shreds of clothing still hanging from its hulking body. But everything human about it had changed, was still changing as it bellowed its rage into the cold black, and Leon could only stare. Its body was swollen and rippling with strained muscles, the bare chest puffed and bloated with its endless scream. Its right arm was 6 inches longer than its left, stained bone claws jutting from its pulsing hand, and the bulbous moving tumor in its right bicep looked like nothing so much as an eyeball the size of a dinner plate. Jerking wetly from side to side as if searching. And the scream was changing too, getting deeper, rougher, the shaggier face falling forward and melting into its chest, like hot wax, like a movie effect, the creature's head flowed into its upper body, disappearing smoothly into the inflamed and greedy skin. And at the same time, another face was forming, growing, rising up from the back of its neck with a horrible snapping sound, like fingers being broken. Slitted eyes cracked open, a bony red hole of a mouth forming to take up the furious cry with a new voice. And Leon squeezed the trigger in denial, a denial of the monster's unholy existence. Boom! The shot hit its chest, a thick purplish blood spraying out, cutting off the creature's scream. But that was all it did. The monster's new face angled towards Leon, the domed head tilting, and it hopped down onto the platform, landing in a half crouch on its legs, as big as Leon's chest. It took one jumping, crooked step forward and was close enough for Leon to smell the strange chemical musk that poured from its glistening skin, and see that the wound on its chest had stopped bleeding. The strange flesh was eating the tiny holes. The creature raised its mighty claws, and Leon stumbled backwards, pumping another round and firing as the talons came down. Shink! And sparks flew from the metal rails as the shots blasted into the creature's stomach, more purplish fluid splattering from its body. The almost point-blank range of the heavy round barely phased the towering monster. It took another step, and Leon backed away, pumping another round, and he tripped on the steps that led up to the transport room. Tripped and fell on his ass, the round going high over the creature's bullet-shaped head. One more step and it would be on him. Dead. Except it didn't take the step. Instead it turned towards the railing, its bizarre head tilting, the pits of its rudimentary nostrils flaring. And silently, almost gracefully, it leapt over the edge of the platform, out onto the passing darkness. For a moment, Leon didn't move. He couldn't move. He was too busy trying to understand that the monster hadn't killed him. It had smelled or sensed something. It had broken off the attack. It had certainly wouldn't have, off the attack that it certainly would have won, and had jumped off the moving transport. I'm not dead. It's gone. It's gone and I'm not dead. Why, he didn't know, and he couldn't begin to guess. Accident that he was alive was enough, and a short time later, maybe no more than a few seconds, his knotted thoughts and sense told him that the transport was slowing down. The shaft was getting lighter, and the blackness was washing to gray. Leon crawled to his feet and went to check on Ada. Sherry had heard the monster from far away, from somewhere deep in the giant hole, and felt even more scared than she had when the giant, Mr. X, Claire called him, had come into the train station. Claire had said it probably wasn't even the monster, that it was probably mostly likely some machine problems, but Sherry wasn't convinced. The sound was so distant and strange that it could have been something else. But what if it wasn't? What if Claire's wrong? They stood outside a warehouse in the chill of the dark, stood over the big hole in the ground, and waited for the mechanical noise to stop. The almost full moon was low in the sky, and Sherry could tell by the deep blue light of the horizon that it was very early in the morning. She didn't feel tired, though. She felt scared and anxious, and even with Claire holding her hand, she didn't want to go down into the black hole where the monster could be. After what seemed like a long time, the humming noise of the machinery stopped, and Claire stepped back from the hole. The transport shaft, she said, and turned back towards the warehouse. Let's go go see if we can recall the... Sherry? Sherry hadn't moved to follow. She stared down into the hole, holding her charm and wishing that she was brave like Claire. But she wasn't. She knew she wasn't, and she didn't want to go down into the dark. I can't go down there. I'm not like Claire. I don't care if that's where my mom went. I don't care at all. Sherry felt a warmth cross her back, and she looked up, startled to see that Claire had taken off her vest and was slipping it over her shoulders. I want you to have this, Claire said, in spite of her fear. Sherry suddenly felt a rush of confused happiness. But why? It's yours, and you'll get cold. Claire ignored her for a minute, helping her put it on. It was too big for her, and it had some dirt on it, but it was the coolest thing Sherry thought she'd ever worn. For me? She wants me to have it. Claire knelt in front of her, now wearing only a thin black t-shirt and shorts. She looked at her very seriously, pulling her vest closer over Sherry's chest. I want you to have it because I can tell you're scared, she said firmly. And I've had it for a long time, and when I wear it, I feel like I can kick ass. Like nothing can stop me. My brother has a leather jacket with the same design on the back, and he kicks ass. But he got the idea from me. Oh, okay, Blade Charge. She smiled suddenly, a tired, warm smile that made Sherry forget all about the monster, just for a minute. So now it's yours, and every time you wear it, I want you to remember that I think you are the best 12-year-old who has ever walked. Sherry smiled back, hugging the faded pink denim to her body. And it's a bribe, huh? Claire nodded without hesitation. Yes, and it's a bribe. So what do you say? Sighing, Sherry reached her hand, and then they walked back into the warehouse to find the controls for the elevator. There's a lot of breaks in this part. I'm getting there. Ada woke up as Leon set her gently on the creaking cot. woke up with a pounding headache and a pain in her side. Her first thought was that she had been shot. When she opened her eyes and Leon's worried pale face swam into focus, she remembered. He was going to kiss me, I think, and then... What happened? Leon reached down and brushed her hair off her forehead, smiling a little. A monster happened. The same one that got Bertolucci, I think. It put its hand through the wall of the transport and knocked you over. You hit your head after it clawed you. Virus! Ada struggled to sit up, to look at the wound, but a headache knocked her back. She reached up and carefully touched the throbbing spot just over her left temple, wincing and feeling the sticky lump. Hey, just stay put, Leon said. The wound isn't too bad, but you look pretty seriously knocked. But you took a pretty serious knock. Ada closed her eyes, trying to collect herself. If she had been infected, there wasn't anything she could do about it now. And really, what an irony would it be if it was Birkin who'd stabbed her and he was still hot? She'd end up collecting a G-virus sample in an extremely personal way. Deep breath. Keep it together. You're not in the transport anymore. What does that tell you? Where are we? She asked, opening her eyes. Leon shook his head. I'm not sure. Like you said, it's an underground lab or factory of some kind. The transport is just outside. I brought you to the closest room. Ada turned her aching head enough to see a small window over the cluttered counter, looking out into the transport bay. Gotta be 4th level, where the lift stops. The main synthesis lab was on the 5th level. Leon was staring down at her so sincerely, his bright blue gaze still so achingly tender, that just for a few seconds, Ada thought about aborting the mission. They could go down the escape tunnel together. They could hop on a train and get out of the city. They could run away, far, far away. And then what? Call Trent and tell him that you'll offer a refund? Sure. Then maybe you can meet Leon's parents, get a ring, buy a little white house with a picket fence, and have a couple of kids. You could take up crochet and rub his feet when he comes home after a hard day busting drunks and making traffic stops. Happily ever after. Ada closed her eyes again, unable to look at him as she spoke. My head hurts pretty badly, Leon. And the tunnel I saw on the map, I don't know where it is exactly. I'll find it, he said softly. I'll find it, then I'll come back for you. Don't worry about anything, okay? Be careful, she whispered, and then she felt his soft lips graze her forehead, heard him stand up and move towards the door. Just stay here. I'll be back soon, he said, and the door opened and closed and she was alone. He'll be okay. He'll get lost trying to find the tunnel. He'll come back. He'll see that I'm gone and take the lift back to the surface. I can find the sample and escape and it will all be over. Ada counted a minute and then sat up and slowly grimaced at the pounding of her skull. A bad knock indeed, but not a debilitating one. She could still function. There was a noise outside, and Ada stood up, walking to one of the small windows. She knew the sound even before she looked, and she felt her heart sink a little. The transport was heading up, probably recalled to the factory by an umbrella team. Which means I don't have a lot of time. And if they find him... No, Leon would be okay. He was a fighter, and he had the sense to run from danger. He was strong and decent, and he didn't need to have someone like her in his life. She'd been crazy to consider it, even for a moment. It was time to wrap things up, to do what she had come to do, remember who she was. A freelance agent, a woman with no qualms about stealing or killing to complete a job. A cool and efficient thief who could take pride in a career with no misses. Ada Wong always walked away with the goods, and it would take more than a few hours with one blue-eyed cop to make her forget it. Ada pulled the key cards and master key from her pouch and opened the door, telling herself that she was doing the right thing, and hopeful that in time she'd come to believe it. Whoa. Woo! Talking for hours on end leave you lightheaded. I only have one more chapter to go, but woo! Woohoo! Oh, I am dizzy. Luckily, this chapter is incredibly short, So we'll be wrapping up shortly here. Here we go. 26. Annette runs into some trouble. The trip down to the cargo room hadn't been bad. She only run across one carrier, one of the first stagers, and had blown a hole into its ashy, withered skull with the first shot. She passed under a sleeping RE3, but hadn't stirred from the ceiling bed, and it seemed that the other creatures still lurking in the facility shadows hadn't figured out that they were free. Either that, or more of them had disintegrated into mush than she'd imagined. In any case, she'd be gone before she had to worry about it either way. In all, she made it to the cargo room hall in under 3 minutes, and I punched in the key codes with a sense of grand accomplishment. The high from the shot was wearing off, but she was still feeling good, until the hatch to the empty cargo room refused to open. Just a regular cargo room. The cargo room is not empty. And then I tapped the simple code in a second time, more careful, and nothing. It was one of the only doors in the facility that didn't open automatically on a failsafe trigger, but it shouldn't have been a problem. There was a verification disk in the slot beneath the controls, the disk that had always been there in spite of Umbrella's insistence that only section heads were supposed to have access. And of course, upon checking, she'd seen that it wasn't there, that it wasn't where it was supposed to be. Someone had taken it. Annette stood in front of the locked hatch in the empty hall and felt the first bright tendrils of panic rage into her mind, a hysteria that she couldn't allow to take hold. The lab's going to blow up, and I've wasted almost 5 minutes now. Where's the goddamn disc? Easy. Take it easy. You're okay. It's okay. A gentle echo, a whisper of a reason in the shining hall. She'd simply have to take the elevator from a different level. She had the master key. She had a weapon. She had the time. Not much, but enough. Breathing deeply, Annette started back towards the hall and led to the stairs, reminding herself all was well and that she didn't really matter. Umbrella was going to pay for whether or not she made it out alive. She didn't want to die. She wasn't going to die. But the gleaming, blood-splattered corridors and once sterile labs were going to burn either way, so there was no need to panic. And she turned right and moved quickly down the connecting hall. Her footsteps loud and hollow in the silence. A ceiling panel crashed down in front of her, and an RE3, a licker, dropped down to the floor and screamed for her blood. No! Annette fired, but only hit its scrabbling shoulder as it darted forward, reaching out with one of the deformed claws to swipe at her. She felt a sharp red pain in her forearm, and fired again, shocking and disbelieving. The second one caught it in the throat, and it screamed, blood spraying from its torn neck. Its trumpeting shriek, a garbled and spitting cry as it lunged at her again. The third shot blew into its gray jelly of its brain, and it flopped into a spasming spot just a few inches from her trembling legs. Gasping as she realized how close she'd been, Annette looked down at her bleeding arm, at the thick scratches that had been torn through her lab coat. And something gave. Something in her mind. Her racing mind, her pounding heart, the blood in the liquor, William's liquor, dead on the floor in front of her. All these things whirled and danced, spinning into a circle that came together and focused into a single stunning simple thought. A thought that made sense of it all. It isn't theirs. It was so clear, so crystal clear. She couldn't run from pain, because pain would find her wherever she ran. She had proof, dripping down her arm. William had understood, but had lost himself before she could explain. Before she could tell her what she really needed to do. She had to confront her attackers and make sure they understood that the G-Virus wasn't theirs because it didn't belong to them. But will they understand? Can they? Maybe, maybe not. But she was so overwhelmed by the profound simplicity of the truth. She knew that she had to try to make them see. The work was William's, it was his legacy, and now it was hers. She'd known that before, but now she knew it. A ray of light in her mind that made everything else trivial. Not theirs, mine. She'd have to find them, tell them, and once they accepted the truth, they would have to leave her alone. And then, if there was still time, she could go her own way. Leon thought he heard shots. Oh, sorry. I skipped a paragraph here. But first she needed another shot. Smiling, her eyes wide and starry, Annette stepped over the liquor and started for the stairs. Leon thought he heard shots. He was in some kind of surgical bay, the first room at the end of the first passage he'd taken after leaving Ada, and he looked up from the pile of crumpled papers he'd found, listening but distant. Listening, but the distant cracks didn't repeat, so he went back to his search. He rifled quickly through the pages, desperate to find anything besides the endless list of numbers and letters beneath the umbrella letterhead. Come on, there must be something useful in all this. He wanted out. He wanted to get Ada and get the hell out. The disemboweled corpse slumped in the corner was reason enough, but it was more than that. The very air of the room, of the hall outside the room, and he was willing to bet every room in the facility was just wrong. It stank like death, but worse. There was an atmosphere of something darker, something immortal. Evil. They performed experiments here. They ran tests and God knows what else here. And they created a zombie plague. They created the monstrous demon that attacked Ada. They murdered an entire city. Whatever they meant to do, they were practicing evil. Evil on a grand scale. The transport had taken them into a secret umbrella facility, and it was a big one. From their numbers on the wall, he knew he was on the 4th floor, whatever that meant. And the catwalk he'd taken to get the strange operating room. Only one of the 3 choices had stretched over what had to be 60 or 70 feet of open space, the bottom to it lost in shadow. He didn't know how deep he and Ada had come, but he didn't really care. What he wanted was a map, like the one she'd found in the sewers, a clear and simple diagram with an arrow pointing to the out. And it ain't here. Frustrated, Leon pushed the useless papers aside and saw there was a computer disk lying on the steel table that had been hidden beneath the stacks of chemical readouts. He picked it up, frowning, for cargo room verification was printed on the label in smudged block letters. Sighing, Leon slipped it into his pocket and rubbed his aching eyes with the right hand, his left arm basically useless after carrying Ada from the lift. He didn't want to look for the computer to see what was on the disk. He didn't want to go wandering from the room to look for the exit, seeing what atrocities Umbrella had played with before they'd shut themselves down. He was tired and in pain and worried about Ada, and he decided that he was, as he walked back to the door, that he should go back and talk to her. He wanted to ease her mind, saying that he would find a way out, but the place was just too goddamn huge. If she even knew the direction or could remember the floor number. Leon opened the door, stepping out into the hall, and a woman with a gun standing in front of him, a 9mm pointed at his chest. She was bleeding, thin streams of crimson pouring from one arm and dripping down the dirty white lab coat. And the look on her face, the strange, wide-eyed, glassy look that played across her features, told him that making any sudden moves would just be a very bad idea. Oh, Jesus, what is this? You murdered my husband, she said. You and your partner, and the girl too. All of you wanted to dance on his grave, but I have news for you. She was high on something. He could hear it in her high, trembling voice, and see it by the way her skin twitched and ticked. He kept his hand at his sides. He kept his voice low and calm. Ma'am, I'm a police officer, and I'm here to help, okay? I don't want to hurt you. The woman dipped her bloody hand into her pocket and held up something, a glass tube full of some purple fluid. She grinned wildly, raising it overhead, the gun still trained on his chest. Here it is. It's what you wanted, isn't it? Listen to me, do you hear? It isn't yours! Do you understand what I'm saying? William made it, and I helped him, and it doesn't belong to you. Leon nodded, speaking slowly. It doesn't belong to me. You're right. It's yours, absolutely. The woman wasn't even listening. You think you can take it, but I'll stop you. I'll keep it from taking it. There's plenty of time. Time for me to kill you and Ada, and anyone else who tries to take it. Ada? What do you know about Ada? Leon barked, taking a half step towards the man-woman, no longer feeling so calm. Did you hurt her? Tell me! The woman laughed, a humorless, insane cackle. Umbrella sent her, you stupid shit. Ada Wong, Miss Love 'em and Leave 'em herself. She seduced John to get the G-virus, but it's not hers either. It's not. It's not yours. It's mine! A massive shock rocked the floor, pitching Leon to the ground, a rumbling vibration that shook the walls, and crash! Pipes and plaster rained from the ceiling, a thick beam striking the woman down in a dull thump. Leon covered his head as bits of concrete and white chunks of drywall slapped him. And it was over. Leon sat up, staring at the woman in shock, not sure what had happened. She wasn't moving, the metal beam that had struck her still hanging from the ceiling as one of her arms pinned beneath it. And a cool, clear voice suddenly blared from the hidden speakers somewhere in the walls, female, calm, and punctuated by the rhythmic bleat of a honking horn. The self-destruct sequence has been activated. This auto-destruct sequence cannot be aborted. All personnel should evacuate immediately. The self-destruct sequence has been activated. This program cannot be aborted. All personnel should evacuate immediately. Leon scrambled to his feet, took one running step towards the fallen woman, and then reached down and plucked the glass cylinder from her outstretched hand, shoving it into his utility bag. He didn't know who she was, but she was too crazy to be holding on to anything in a test tube. Ada. He thought he had to get to Ada, and had to get out. The throbbing, screeching alarms blasted through the echoing halls, chasing him through the door to the catwalk, along with the indifferent-sounding female's repetitive messages of imminent destruction. The recording voice didn't say how long they had been, but Leon felt quite certain that he didn't want to be around when the clock ran out. And that is the cliffhanger we're ending on today, with Chapter 27 for next time. And most likely the conclusion of the rest of this book. So, how are you guys enjoying it? And there's only really 3 of you watching. The lag is really garbage with this. I wish I could make it more instant. I'm just waiting for someone to respond. If not, this is going to be where the stream ends. But I thank you all very much for joining me. I had a lot of fun reading this. This is such a fun book. Although I remember the ending of this is way more truncated than the actual end of the game. Which I find kind of interesting. S.D. Perry seems to have a thing with just kind of wrapping things up at the end. She doesn't go through the rigmarole of a lot of different endings. We'll discuss more about it in the last stream, which should be next week, next Wednesday, so make sure to join in for that. Thank you all so much for watching me. Anyone watching this after the fact, if you want to support the channel, I have my Patreon down in the link. Please support me down there. You can donate during the streams with the Streamlabs down there as well. Thank you all so much for watching, and catch you all on the flip side.